Hey, everybody. We are so excited to be back. We're in our summer series, and we have a super special guest with us today. Her name is Carrie Bennett, and she is really an expert on circadian rhythm and first morning light. And we're going to get into all the stuff today. First, Carrie's here too. Hi, Carrie. We have two
Hi.
Carries.
Yeah. Excited.
Uh, yeah, we're just super excited. Carrie Bennett, thank you so much for being here today. We're just honored to have you. If you just want to start just a little bit about you and your background and how you got to quantum biology, and maybe for some of our listeners, they might not even know what quantum biology means. So maybe just a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you both. So, quantum biology was never on my radar back in the day, right? I didn't really know anything about it. It was by necessity for my own health. And also, in fact, in clinical practice, I was seeing more and more complex health cases come to me. And I knew I must have been missing a big portion of the healing and health puzzle. And that's where I stumbled upon the work of Dr. Jack Kruse and Gerald Pollack and Gilbert Ling and all these pioneer researchers in the idea that our light environment impacts our health. And to me now it's like a no-brainer, right? But back in the day, I was like, oh, I was really stuck in the nutrition, supplement, exercise paradigm,
Yeah.
right? And that did not move the needle enough for my own healing. And it only started to move the needle so far for some of these more complex cases that I was getting. And so once I started to dive into the research of what's now a field that's called applied quantum biology, it's this idea that we are like these beings, and yes, we're made up of organs, and yes, we're made up of chemicals, but at the smallest scale, we're made up of things like electrons, protons, neutrons. I mean, that's really what we are. We're energy. And we have the ability then, we know now through things like light signaling, to influence the energy in our body. And that in and of itself sets an amazing foundation for healing. And so that's really what we're talking about when we say quantum biology. It's just looking at the body at a smaller scale, but still doing some very important practical things on a daily basis to really align the body into its ability to heal itself.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a super good explanation. So it's taking the biology down to the electron, photon, and some of you're probably your head spinning. You're going back to high school chemistry, but it really is the foundation really for our health, right? At the most subatomic level, right? And
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So if you look at it, what do we need for energy? Well, people say, well, we need food. But then when you open up any textbook, and any textbook says, well, it's the food ultimately gets broken down into electrons, right? And those
right.
electrons are what generate energy inside of the cell. So that's kind of what we're talking about. We're just breaking it down to that level. And now we know that there's ways beyond food to get those electrons into the body and really support health and healing. And so that's what I love sharing with people, because these things really are game changers when it comes to healing, and they're oftentimes free and easy.
Right, right. And yeah, that's something that we love, for our listeners and for a lot of our clients is, I think a lot of people look for, the bigger things. As you said, it might not always be a zebra, right? You need something as simple as just syncing your circadian rhythm, which I'm so excited. So Carrie, talk to us a little bit just about, the importance of first morning light and syncing that circadian rhythm.
Yeah, sure. So this was the biggest game changer for my health. And when I started applying it to my clients, again, the shift was palpable in terms of things like improved energy, digestion, sleep. And so this got me into really sharing with them this idea that our body has a timing mechanism inside of it. And this timing mechanism is called our circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm is set by a certain wavelength of light that comes from the sun. And so this is why I think first morning light is so important, is because officially to my brain, the clock in my brain, that's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, it needs to know essentially when to start my day. And when it knows when to start my day, it can wake up the adrenal glands to make some cortisol. It can wake up the pancreas to start to anticipate producing things like insulin and digestive enzymes, the thyroid for metabolic support. And so, and so many other, like every cell in our body needs that signal. And so what happens at sunrise is you get this beautiful blend of intense enough blue light and red light that just turns on the clock in my brain. It is the signal of the start of my day. And so now all of a sudden the light entering my eyes, and I've got these little sensors for the light entering my eyes. The backs of my eyes have these sensors for specifically the blue wavelength of light. And so all of a sudden these sensors are now going off, very much like almost like a motion detector, right? It's like, oh, it's there, the blue light's there. And there's a direct connection between those sensors and the clock in my brain. So that starts my circadian rhythm. It starts my day. And the beautiful part about that blue wavelength of light from sunlight is that it gradually increases in its amount and intensity until solar noon, when the sun's at the high point in the sky, and then it goes away, away, away until after sunset. It's no longer being picked up by the sensors in my eyes. And so it's the perfect changing color of light to be able to tell time. And unfortunately, these days, as you ladies know, we're not living outdoors very much anymore, and the wavelength that's coming from our screens and our light bulbs is dominant in that blue wavelength, and that blue wavelength does nothing to mimic the beautiful change that we see when it comes from natural light. And so first thing in the morning, we tell our brain time of day. It really sets up every organ system in the body to function optimally. And when that signal is always off, it's kind of like just being in the twilight zone. It's like, do I need energy? Don't I need energy? Am I digesting my food? Am I going to rest? So it can be very chaotic when we don't get that signal on a consistent basis.
Great. So if there's a couple things for the listeners, if they're new to this, and there's 3 things that they can start doing tomorrow morning. So what would, I know there's a lot of differences between, you're supposed to be out at sunrise, right? Ideally a little bit before sunrise. And then within that hour and a half of sunrise. So is that important, or can they just get up, say they get up at 6:30 or 7 a.m.? I know around here sunrise is around, like, it's early now. It's like 5:50 or so. And so if they're missing that sunrise, is that okay if they just get that first morning light within, and give us the time frame? How soon within sunrise?
Yeah, so I say yes. I mean, I'm a firm believer that the human body is smart enough to say, oh, this is the amount of blue light, and it can translate that into a time, right? So I'm a firm believer that I don't want someone like my clients, say, who are in Scandinavia, where the sun is now rising at like 4:30 in the morning. I don't need them to get up at sunrise, right? But I do need them to sync up with natural light first thing. And so in order to do that effectively, let's say they wake up at 6, in order to do that effectively, they have to make sure that the first thing that they don't see is their bright cell phone screen, right? And so that's where I encourage my clients to set their phone screens to red, or to have red or orange tone blue blockers that they've worn the night before. So that way, that's one of the best ways that we can really disrupt that signaling, is just by shocking our brain into the middle of the afternoon, which is what those wavelengths of light do. So first thing, make sure we're not putting any artificial light into the eyes, and then go outside. And if you can spend at least 5 minutes outside, day in and day out, it's the consistency. Yeah. It's like, as opposed to, it's like a metronome that just needs to be tuned a little bit, right? Like, it's easier just to kind of like put something just back into tune every single day, make sure it's lined up, as opposed to like completely broken and thinking that we can fix the tuning by doing 30 minutes once a month or twice a month. Like, you're way better off just consistently syncing with your first morning light as many days of the week as you can. And it doesn't have to be sunny. You don't have to see the sun coming up over the horizon. It could be cloudy, rainy, snowy, foggy. So that's where the consistency matters, because even for those of us who live in these environments where it gets very cloudy and cold during parts of the year, it's still important to go outside and sync up.
So even 5 minutes, Carrie, is enough.
If you do it consistently, absolutely it is. Now, for my clients, for my night owls who have not been able to go to sleep naturally before 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they may need more. They may need to really anchor in for a month or 2. This is morning. They're the people who I say 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes outside in the morning can do wonders for that, in conjunction with blocking the artificial light at night. But that really is all that's needed consistently to keep the metronome in sync.
Really? Okay. So it's not more than that, then just first morning, 5 minutes. They don't need to go out midday.
If they want to, there's never harm in it. The key, I always tell people what the body is keying in on are the transitions. The transitions would be, let's say, from when there was no blue light being picked up by my sensors to when that blue light appears. So that's the morning light. The next transition is from when there's no ultraviolet light to now ultraviolet light's appearing. That's when the sun's a little higher in the sky in the morning. That's another transition. Another transition, if it's available for people, would be when ultraviolet B appears, which is when we can make vitamin D through the skin. And then, yes, in the afternoon, it's good to go outside to signal that the fact that the blue light is disappearing. And so it is important to key in on those transitions, but we don't have to live outside for, 7 or 8 hours for this to be successful for people, right? So I don't want people to feel overwhelmed in this in any capacity. And I find that those consistent check-ins are very adequate to direct the body towards understanding timing and circadian rhythm so that it can use that information to heal.
Okay. Okay. But then, of course, at night, blocking that blue light, right? Once the sun sets.
Exactly. Because if the sun sets and then my sensors aren't picking up any blue light, and then all of a sudden we flip on light switches or we stare at a TV or a phone or a computer screen, all of a sudden it's like that shock of blue drives us back into what the brain thinks is the middle of the afternoon again. Right. So this is my clients who used to be like, I'm really physically exhausted, but I'm so mentally wired. I get this second wind. I can't go to sleep if I try. And it's like, it's because you've artificially taught your brain that it's a new day essentially, and you have to be productive.
Gotcha. Okay, good, good. Okay, so transitioning, because this is fascinating, into the gut. We see so many clients with gut issues, and really, I think, Carrie, Cootie, you would agree. We always talk about how important it is to really fix the gut, right? It's foundational. And I was blown away at some of your information that I read just on your website and on Instagram about how important light signaling is to the gut. And I read about how you pretty much got rid of your gluten intolerance.
100%. Completely gone.
So yeah, well, I'm going to leave this to you. Where should we start? Where do we start with light and gut?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, and my gluten sensitivity was horrible. And I've seen this happen now so many times in clinical practice. It's so cool to see. So first and foremost, there's things in our gut, right, that also need the correct timing. Like, for example, the microbiome is not a static population. It's literally shifting based on time of day and shifting based on time of year in anticipation for when nutrients are going to be coming in, what types of nutrients. So if we're starting to get periods of more ultraviolet light, the microbes are going to start to say, oh, we need to kind of modify our diversity to start to be able to break down carbohydrates and fibers, right? And so that because they can grow now, whereas in the middle of winter, they're not going to grow. So like it's a very dynamic environment that relies on timing. So my gut microbiome relies on the time of day. As I said before, the connection between my brain and my gut brain axis also requires circadian timing to know, okay, now's the time to change stomach acid levels, improve gut motility. I've had clients with chronic constipation for 30 years completely heal that because all of a sudden their gut knows when to make serotonin to help support a bowel movement.
Wow.
So these are just mind-blowing things where your gut motility is responsive to the light signaling. And then when you actually think about healing the repair of leaky gut, the brain needs to know that it's repair time to do that. And that's when there's darkness. And it's typically a couple hours after true darkness is signaled to the brain. But very few of us get the signal of darkness anymore, either because we're looking at a phone or a TV screen into the night, maybe because we've got ambient light really coming into our bedroom, right? And all of those things lower the amount of melatonin we can produce, which needs to elevate from a very key way, not necessarily from taking a supplement, but it needs to elevate in a key way from pineal secretion in order to turn on the clock genes that help our body say it's repair time. So now you can go through cell division to heal leaky gut. And so like all these things that I didn't know about, it took me forever to really start to feel a big change in my digestion. I felt a huge change in my energy and my sleep right away. But my digestion was a little more sluggish because I didn't understand how much I was really needed to like put sunlight on my skin to get this signal, to maybe even use some red light therapy to get this signal. And once I started doing that in conjunction with the morning light signaling and the artificial light at night, blocking that and making a dark sleep space, game changer. Now it took 8 months still, but to go from debilitating gluten intolerance where I was like, let me be aware of absolutely everything at my in-laws' house. Like when I was eating food at a family dinner, I was like, okay, what spices did you use? Let me see. Oh, you know,
Wow.
and
Right.
as opposed to now, it's like, whatever. I've literally had gluten and I don't choose to eat it, when it happens, zero pain, zero bloating, zero horrible gas, and the debilitating fatigue was, it was like someone literally like put it like a shade down, like, okay, go to sleep now.
Right.
So
Right.
it just feels
Yeah.
so good. And it was literally because I was consistent over the course of a year with this light signaling.
That is crazy, Carrie. That is so good. That's such good information because we talk a lot about food sensitivities. And I know Carrie Cootie and I struggle because we do have to take people off foods because
Sure.
they are reacting to them, but we don't want to, and we don't want to leave them off those foods.
Right.
And this is just a huge piece of the puzzle. We've talked about the Carrie Cootie and I have
Yeah.
talked about this because we are desperate about getting people back on the foods and not leaving them off the foods. And, you know, we always, my husband teases me, you know, my bedroom is a dungeon. He's like, yeah, you have to go to room, it has to be black. You know, they tease me, but I'm like, look, like it matters. Even sun coming in the morning, hitting your skin, right? Carrie, can you talk just a little bit? I mean, I know you sort of mentioned it, but light on the skin and how important is that? Your sleep environment, that sort of thing. And in the morning too.
Yeah, sure. So light on the skin is so fascinating because they're finding that light on the skin, whether specifically when it comes from the sun and has ultraviolet light component to it, regulates so many aspects of our body's functions. So we're talking gut health here. And so it will absolutely regulate things like I said, digestive enzyme secretion and stuff like that, the serotonin production in the gut-brain axis. So it regulates all of that. But even more interestingly, like even things like, and it's slightly off topic here, but even things like blood sugar gets regulated when we get sunlight on the skin because the body knows intense ultraviolet light. Now we're going to digest more sugary fructose rich foods. So now we're actually able to increase the amount of GLUT4 receptors we have so we can regulate blood sugar. So it's like all of this thing, and that happens through light on the skin, right? And so I don't know about you, but like, I mean, I don't know. I never really thought of it. Yeah, every once in a while I'd go to the beach maybe and put some light on my abdomen. But other than that, you know, I wasn't like I didn't wear a crop top around all the time outside, you know? So it's like, I can't think of the last time where I'd had really consistent light exposure on my skin. And so when I consistently spent spring, summer, fall, getting that light exposure, and then in the winter using red light therapy, I mean, the healing just amplified drastically because I was getting a daily dose of about 20 minutes of direct sunlight. And we're talking about the mid-afternoon. That's my favorite break, like a mid-afternoon sunlight break. Once I started to build that skin tolerance to the light, because there was a time there where I would burn intensely because I never just went out into the sun regularly enough. And so for those of you listening to this, it's baby steps, right? Starting maybe with the morning light and then building up to more and more intense light. But when you're able to get that consistent light exposure, you signal so many aspects of gut health and gut repair and gut healing and signaling that just are not talked about. And it's so underrated when it comes to supporting healing the gut in so many capacities.
Yeah, I just want to touch on something. You mentioned something really important, and that is building the tolerance. And what people might not understand, and I didn't understand, is that that morning light actually prepares you for that midday sun, right? It's getting you ready to handle those intense ultraviolet rays. And so it's a good time to get your vitamin D, right? Because you're not getting those burning rays early in the morning. So it is important to get that first morning light to prepare you. If I love the sun, I would be outside all day if I could, but it's good to know that if I do, right, schedule that first morning light or am really good about getting the first morning light, I can handle the more intense midday light.
Totally. That's a great point, right? A couple of things in there, right? So there's the first morning light is really rich in red and infrared light, right? And those wavelengths coming from the sun are synonymous with like being anti-inflammatory and soothing and healing. And so
Beautiful.
they're a good prep for the skin. Then as the sun gets higher, when the sun is 10 degrees above the horizon, that's when ultraviolet appears, and a little higher, 30 degrees, that's when ultraviolet B appears. So that's the vitamin D window. So I tell people, if you haven't been getting sunlight on your skin in a long time, you have to spend a week or two prepping with that morning light. And you start with just the more early morning, and then you can add in maybe more of the mid morning, and eventually over the course of time, you'll be able to go out in the middle of the afternoon and get it. And get the more intense vitamin D rich rays. So yeah, but what I never thought impacted this, and now I'm very aware of it, is sunglasses. Sunglasses are a very, I hate to say it, but I really am not a fan in any capacity of sunglasses anymore. There's maybe 2 circumstances that I can think of where I would still wear them. But that being said, picture the signals. If our skin is receiving ultraviolet light, right? Maybe we're trying to make vitamin D, and that signal happens through the skin to the brain, but the eyes are also trying to perceive the light, right? And all of a sudden, if I'm blocking the fact that there's ultraviolet light in my environment from the eye pathway,
it's confusing.
It's confusing. And so I can't sync up my skin gut or my brain skin axis. And so instead of slowly layering on things like building up a bit of a tan or layering into my skin what's called urocanic acid, my skin can make an endogenous ultraviolet filter. So instead of slowly layering those things on, we go from, oh no, burn, histamine, right? A big red reaction, because we're not necessarily signaling in the correct way the endogenous factors we can build in our skin to start to withstand stronger and stronger wavelengths of light.
So interesting. So interesting. Okay, so back to the gut and light on our skin. Can you just explain a little bit why that's important? Because I know they talk about specifically getting light on your belly.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's number one, what the beautiful wavelengths of light are that can be very anti-inflammatory for the gut are the infrared waves. And those infrared, those are very deep penetrating waves, comparatively speaking. Ultraviolet just basically stays at the level of the skin, a little bit deeper for some of it. But those red and near infrared, the near infrared, mid, far infrared, those can penetrate all the way into the gut.
And when do we get those? Sorry to interrupt you.
All day long. All day long. So the
Okay.
sunlight always contains about 40 to 50% of those rays in the infrared range. So it doesn't matter the time of day. And so you do need direct sunlight exposure to really maximize this. But this is where that early morning sunlight can be anti-inflammatory and healing for the gut. One of the things that happens to support the gut's healing in that capacity is the mitochondria that live in the cells of our gut, which are everywhere. They start to make more water. And that water can become that lining, that mucus gel lining that prevents, right? So we can start to facilitate that gel mucus layer, which is a barrier, right? That's our original protector from leaky gut, if you will. So it can facilitate that. It can facilitate the bacteria. It can balance out those bacteria that make that mucus as well to make more of it.
Right.
And those mitochondria start to also make a melatonin inside of the gut that has nothing to do with putting us asleep. In that capacity, melatonin is an antioxidant. And so melatonin can clear up the damage all day long. So we can really benefit from getting this light on the skin anytime we can catch it, so that the mitochondria can really make this melatonin to clear up inflammation.
That's incredible. So just for the listeners listening, I just want to give you a good picture. So what Carrie's talking about is you actually have 3 layers in your gut. You have the microbiome layer, you have this beautiful mucus layer, and then you have a single layer of epithelial cells. And what she's talking about is that mucus layer, right? And also that the biodiversity of that microbiome layer. So as she mentioned, that microbiome layers, those bugs do produce the mucigens, but also she's saying that we're going to produce water from the mitochondria in the gut if we can get light on our skin and help that mucigen or that mucus layer, which is super, super important for a healthy gut. That's huge, Carrie.
It's huge. It's huge. And so it's why I've seen such profound shifts and changes for people with this stuff, because it seems like such a simple thing, yet this is why we're seeing the results that we see when we apply this stuff, because of how many things it impacts. And I mean, I also go back to historically, I mean, we were literally designed to interact with this light, right? Like we weren't
Right.
designed to be behind modern window glass, which blocks a lot of these frequencies. We
Sure.
weren't designed to be disconnected from even the surface of the earth, which we can talk about as well as a flow of electrons. And so it only makes sense to me that once we start to basically take the human body back into the environment
Yeah.
in which it was designed to thrive, it starts to learn how to heal itself and thrive once again.
I mean, it's fascinating, fascinating. So you talked a little bit about UVB light can help with diversity too,
Totally.
correct?
Totally.
Okay,
Yep.
so do you want to talk? I mean, you sort of mentioned it, but there might not be any more. But diversity, lowering the gut inflammation, and UVB is, and when do we get the UVB?
Sure. So UVB is going to be found when the sun, it can reach above 30 degrees above the horizon. And so for those of you who are listening, I have my clients download an app called the Circadian Life app, and they can program in their location and they'll know because these things change
Mhm.
depending on where you are and the time of year. And
Sure.
so there's a time of year when where I live in Michigan, I don't ever get the sun that high in the sky. And so we can't make vitamin D with that UVB light through the skin. And so I encourage people to kind of maybe get that app and kind of start to like develop a different relationship with the sun to be like, oh, okay, now's my window of time to, sync my circadian rhythm. Oh, now is when I can get this beautiful light on my skin to make vitamin D. Oh, now I should block the artificial light at night. It'll share with you all of that stuff. And so, yeah, that ultraviolet light is one that because it varies so much depending on the time of year and even the time of day, meaning it's literally, there's a huge chunk of time when it's not there, a chunk of time when it's there, and a chunk of time when it's gone. And then seasonally, there's stretches in the winter when it's not there at all. This is where the bacteria can really start to key in on exactly the time of day and exactly the season based on how long during the period is the period of UVB light available. So come end of January where I live, we literally get like 3 minutes of it. And now we get like, 10 hours. We get so much of this window, and that shift in the amount of ultraviolet B light that's been appearing slowly but surely since the end of January up is the signal to my gut microbiome that, okay, yep, Carrie is going to start to encounter more and more carbohydrates. Like the number of people with things like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's who can't tolerate the carbohydrates at first, at least. Yes, they may need to go through a period where they may eliminate them for a second, but once they start to heal their gut with the circadian light signaling, the light on the gut, the earthing, I've literally had clients with 15 to 20 bloody watery diarrheas a day
Wow.
completely heal, and they can start to tolerate more and more carbohydrates because their gut microbiome can diversify itself and anticipate what they're going to potentially be digesting.
Fascinating. Fascinating. So good. Okay, so you mentioned earthing, so let's go there. A lot of people have heard of grounding and earthing. Can you, they I'm sure understand putting the feet to the grass. Can you plainly, simply just, explain to them what the power of that really, because it is powerful.
It absolutely is very powerful. And so this goes back to like that fundamental idea of what are we really at the most fundamental level? What is the human body made of? And we're made out of this negative charge, electrons, if you will. And so in order for my body to be healthy, I have to have adequate electron status inside of my cells. I have to use, and I can use those electrons as antioxidants. That's all antioxidants are, right? It's a free electron that can calm an inflammatory cascade. And something, yeah, exactly. Something that's creating inflammation is literally just a chemical or an entity that has an unpaired electron, and electrons like friends, they want to be paired and then they stop creating damage. And so if we think of it that way, and it's like, okay, if I'm generating inflammatory cascades, whether it's in my gut, in my brain, in my joints, if I'm generating these inflammatory cascades, I must do something to calm the inflammation. And if the inflammation is simply seeking another electron to pair with it to calm it down, then what would be the best source of electrons for me to give my body? And that would be the surface of the earth. Earth's surface is an infinite source of electrons that are coming from it. The electrons actually get discharged to the surface of the earth with lightning strikes, and so all of a sudden we have this electron-rich surface of the earth. If I touch any bare skin to it, I instantaneously soak those electrons in. And over the course of 30, 40, 50 minutes, you can significantly see inflammatory hot spots on things like thermographic scans completely, I mean, literally the inflammation completely goes away because you're giving the
Wow.
body what it needs to calm those inflammatory cascades.
I mean, that is huge. So if you're listening, they talk about inflammation being everything, the end all be all, which, we won't go there, but this is something so simple. So about how long? I've heard, and I don't know if this is correct, 6 minutes is enough. Is that true?
It depends on what you're looking for, right?
Okay.
Now, I want to tell people anything is better than nothing because literally the connection with that flow of electrons, if we're touching bare skin to the earth, is instantaneous. So instantaneously, we'll get some flow.
Right.
Within just a couple of seconds, you actually can see a shift in heart rate variability to a balancing of the autonomic nervous system, which to me indicates that our interior environments are stressful. They really truly are stressful, and they're stressful in many ways, from the fact that the lighting is artificial to potentially the flickering of the light bulbs. And so by simply going outside for a couple of seconds, we start to support nervous system regulation, which is
Huge.
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 And then within about 5 minutes, if ever you have seen live blood analysis with red blood cells, red blood cells need electrons around them to be able to deliver nutrients. If they don't have the electrons around them, they start to clump together. And they create,
Yep.
these clumps. This is called rouleau. And so all of a sudden you can see a blood previous to earthing, if you were to test it, that's full of these rouleau stacks of red blood cells, to within 5 minutes afterwards, all of a sudden there's no stacking anymore. And it's because the blood cells have basically sucked the electrons to where they were needed to reestablish these electron halos. And these electron halos are going to repel away from each other. And so now the blood can move more seamlessly through the bloodstream. So that's 5 to 10 minutes. And then at about the 20, 30, 40-minute mark, depending on the intensity of the inflammation, that's when you start to see, let's say, chronic rheumatoid arthritis on a before and after scan completely go away. We're talking about the 30, 40-minute mark right there.
One time they see differences.
One time. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't need to continue to do it, right? Because potentially there was something in the tissue in the first place, let's say a toxin or something that was, but there's, to me, it's a no-brainer. Like if you see a before and after scan like that, and then you see the difference, it's like, oh my gosh, this is obviously supporting this person's healing and the body's ability to lower inflammatory levels. So why not make this a regular habit?
Right. I mean, these are super simple habits, Carrie, that people can do at no cost on a daily basis. Get outside for at least 5 minutes on a consistent basis. Work your way up, maybe midday, block the blue light at night and so talk about the blue light blockers, because there's a ton of them out there. I've used the Spectrum 479. They're pretty cheaply on Amazon. Are those suffice?
Yeah, those are on my product recommendations guide. It's way less about needing to get a fancy pair now, but what won't suffice typically is any clear blue blockers for nighttime use are a scam. Now for daytime use, to support it a little bit, maybe from computer screens, fine. Even yellows, so these are my yellows. Even my yellows would not block enough of the blue light at night to signal darkness to my brain. So you really are looking at an orange or a deep amber tone or a red tone blue blocker. And I've tested so many, and the Spectra 479s check out just fine. They're the ones that we travel with as a family because, like you said, they're not crazy expensive. So if it happens to them, no big deal. And so yeah, they're great. And so I would say, just start with that. If you're literally wanting to start with this, that's $35 investment. Everything else is free. And give it a try and just see. Notice the differences. Notice the little benefits and changes. This is one last thing about this idea. When I work with my clients, I always like to ask them, what do they feel is improving? Like what's working well for you? Because I've been on that healing journey, and it's so easy to be like, well, my poops are still like this, or I'm still burping, or blah, 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 as opposed to like, oh my gosh, I wake up in the morning and I don't have like this crazy brain fog, or, I can finally focus on things. And so it's like, I always like clients to, as they're starting to apply this stuff, to start focusing on what's working for them, because that also helps to facilitate healing as well.
Amen. Amen. Isn't that? And I can attest to it. I mean, Carrie's been doing it for a while, but I just regularly have, and I live in Ohio. So, but man, it was February and 23 degrees and I was still getting out there. But I'm telling you, that consistency, my mood, my sleep, I can't even begin to tell you the difference. So it's worth it. It's so worth it. And they're free. So get your morning light, block the blue, the junk blue light at night, and get out there and put your feet in the grass. Those are so simple with huge, huge health benefits. Carrie Bennett, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise. We really appreciate it. We know you're super busy and we're just so, so grateful.
Thank you so much for having me. I want this information to get out to as many people as possible. So I was just so thrilled for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.